what was I gonna say? Oh, every year, well, I don't know if it happens every year, but I know the mayor brings McDuffie's family out and they do like a memorial where they lay flowers in a specific spot. I think the spot where he's was
buried at, I think it's called Greenwood Cemetery.
At Greenwood? Here?
I think it's in.
Yeah, it's in
Liberty City.
Liberty City. Wow, it's haven't been over there in a while. 15th Avenue, about 7th Street, 7th.
So I just want to let those people that are just joining us, that will be starting in just a minute. Our panelists are already having a very good time getting to know each other. So you came in during the middle of a conversation, but we'll begin. Let's give everyone maybe like 3 more minutes, 6:05.
Sounds good.
Okay, great. Sorry to interrupt, Robert.
Okay. Well, my train of thought just kind of.
I'm sorry. I know. I
think we should all go and pay our respects to Mr. McDuffie. That would be really.
We should.
Yeah.
We should.
Yeah. Marvin Dunn did an amazing during the George Floyd protests. He did an amazing McDuffie to Floyd caravan,
wow.
where he basically led like 100 cars. I took my whole family with me around all the events that happened during the riots, and we ended up at the place where McDuffie was beaten to death.
And
but it was very powerful.
And Mimi Foray just joined us. Hi, Mimi.
What's up, Mimi?
Mimi Foray.
Wow.
The gang's all here.
Mimi, thank you for coming. We were just talking before we started about your father and just how amazing, just what an amazing leader and visionary he was.
We can't see her. I can't see her. Maybe you guys can.
But she's if you look in the chat box, she can write us little notes.
Wrote in the chat.
Okay. I'm not that sophisticated. Maybe I am.
Get it together, Nicholas. Get it together.
He can write a book, but he can't see a chat box.
Right? You can't be writing like that and you don't know how to use it.
I can write a book,
but
I don't know how to do it.
Nicholas, did you write longhand or on a computer?
I actually wrote my first book, the whole thing, which was 500 pages of longhand, but nowadays I write on a computer.
Had this feeling.
So that is progress.
Yes.
Oh, no. Sorry, Mimi.
Hey, Angela, what up? Hi.
That's my favorite part, when like Chire shout outs to all her like fans on the chat box, because the first Art and Activism was the same thing, like, hey girl, like like calling on everyone, and I'm like, this
Where's
is
Lonnie? Hey, Lonnie.
Lonnie.
Chire has a fan club that is, and this is really a convening of the Chire and the Nicholas and the Robert McKnight.
I see the 4 people. 5.
Isn't it fun to go somewhere where you don't have to drive?
Yes.
Yes.
The best. Yeah. All I do is drive. So when I don't have to drive.
Robert, Mimi saying hello to you, Mimi Foray.
Hello. Hello, Mimi.
We've known each other for a long time. I mean, Mimi, as an artist who has been involved in the community, I think I met her when she was still a teenager.
Who, Mimi?
Practically. Mimi were like she was just still an art, maybe. Well, I met her in 1976, I think.
So should we get started? I can introduce everyone briefly, and then we'll get going with the program.
Sounds good.
Okay. So for those of you that are joining us on Zoom and on Facebook, Good evening, welcome. My name is Laura Novo, and I'm the Curatorial and Public Programs Associate at the Bakehouse Art Complex. Thank you for joining us for the third and final iteration of Art and Activism for this season. Today's program is moderated by Bakehouse Executive Director Cathy Leff and features journalist and author Nicholas Griffin, visual artist Robert McKnight, and visual artist, activist, and current artist in residence at the Community Justice Project, Chire, Regans. Art and Activism is a program exploring the intersection between art and social justice and how art can be used in function of community building and as a tool in advocating for and amplifying the voices of diverse communities. Griffin's most recently published book, The Year of Dangerous Days, Riots, Refugees, and Cocaine in Miami, 1980, provides the social, economic, and political context for today's session, which will focus on how artists have responded to the events in our city, both past and present. I'd like to thank Nicholas, Robert, and Chire for being here with us today. And I'd also like to thank Bakehouse's Executive Director, Cathy Leff, and my colleague, Ricardo Moore, for his help with communications, marketing, and development initiatives. For the ongoing and critical support we receive, the Bakehouse would like to thank its private and public sponsors, including the Knight Foundation, the Paris Family Foundation through Curarte, and the Miami Foundation, Miami-Dade County and the Department of Cultural Affairs, and the state of Florida and its Division of Cultural Affairs. I'd also like to remind you to consider donating to Bakehouse this week through the Give Miami Day initiative. Yeah. Donations are accepted now through 11:59 p.m. on Thursday, November 19th. And by donating, you help us to continue supporting our artists by providing them with affordable studio spaces, art making facilities, and infrastructure. I'd like to ask that everyone save their questions for the end. Please feel free to ask any questions or share any comments in the chat box to the right-hand side of the screen, or for those of you watching on Facebook, please leave your questions via the comment section. And once again, thank you for joining us tonight. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook for information on future virtual programming and Bakehouse artist updates. So Cathy, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Thank you for all the work that you do and for putting this together and for initiating the series. So really, thank you. And Laura's going to join us at the end. You'll just pop up when our time is up, and then you'll moderate the Q&A and what the chats are. So thank you all for being here, and thank you, Nicholas, Chire, and Robert. So I wanted to start out just by, since we really want to look at, what was really how artists were responding to the times and how artists always respond to the times. But because Nicholas has written this extraordinary book that really documents a pivotal period in, Miami history, 1980, wanting to ask you, Nicholas, if you could just start out, giving us the context, what was going on in Miami in the 1980s, but just how did you even, before that, how did you arrive? You came here in 2013, moved here with your family. Did you come here with that in mind, or did you discover this untold history, or how did the book arrive?
Sure.
So
I came.
Context.
Yeah, I very much wanted to write about Miami. Before I moved down, I was living in New York, and I knew quite a lot about Miami. And I had been trying to pitch a Miami book before I even moved down here. But I got shot down by all the New York publishing houses. No one wanted to touch it. It was a big, broad, sort of messy idea. But once I moved down here, I couldn't quite let go of the idea, but I did totally reshape it. And I realized I was aiming way too big, and the history of Miami is so complex that I thought if I could really narrow it down to 1 year and sort of lasso that 1 year and go deep, I could probably get to all those themes that I'd wanted to discuss over a sort of 6 or 7 year period. So actually, when I then went back to New York to try and sell the book with a bit more Miami experience under my belt, I actually knew what I was talking about that time, and I got lucky, and we had a few publishers who were interested in doing something with me. So suddenly I had life.
And have you worked on it for the past 7 years?
I worked on it for five straight years with a small break in the middle to try and help someone adapt it into a TV show. But basically, either way, this is what I've been working on for years. Yeah.
So give us it's a book that everybody who lives in Miami, cares about Miami, or has an interest in Miami should read. It's a really, even having lived through this period and been intimately involved with the city. And as I mentioned earlier, Mimi Ferrer is listening, and her father is a pivotal character in this in the story and was a really pivotal figure in our community. So I really encourage everybody to read it. Our favorite bookstore is Books and Books, but you can get it online, Audible, Amazon. But tell us, can you give us a broad sweeping overview of the context of the dynamics? I mean, it's hard to really do that.
Sure.
In a general sense, so that we can then get Robert and Chire to, involve in the conversation.
Sure, I'll give a really potted version of the book, the Cliff Notes. So basically it's, I'm trying to tell the story of a city in 1 year, and it's such a hinge moment in a city, because the city at the beginning and the end of the year, you're basically looking at two very different cities. Everything's changed in that 1 year, especially the demographics and the voting patterns, which are so important in the city we now live in. But basically the city in the 70s, on the way up, there was a choice to be made in Miami. You could either follow a group called the Non-Group, which was an unelected bunch of guys who would get together and try and set, they were the biggest, the wealthiest businessmen in Miami. They were all guys, they were all white, and they weren't bad guys, they just weren't elected to do what they were doing, but they were doing it anyway, which was trying to drive the city in directions they wanted. They wanted it to be kind of like a mixture of New York and Jacksonville and Atlanta and New Orleans. And then there was a second idea, and that idea was really the brainchild of a man called Maurice Ferré, who was the mayor of Miami, ended up being the 6th-time mayor of Miami. But he had a very, very different idea of what Miami should be. Instead of trying to look north, Miami should be looking south, because it could have this sort of unique role in America. Why be like every other city, or even worse, a shadow of other cities, when you could be something vibrant and unique? And his idea was that if you look at a different map, and he was born in Puerto Rico, so he did have a different map in his head. For him, the Caribbean was sort of the center of the world. And if you broke out from there, then Miami is really central so far as it's connected to the United States and the Caribbean, South America, Central America. And he wanted Miami to play this role as sort of this bridge as a service sector, as a cultural sector. And it was this enormous possibility to make something really special. So that's what he was up to. But he then has this huge crisis just when things are going really well at the end of the 70s. And the Financial Times is here writing stories about how well Miami's doing and how exciting this new Miami could be. There's this huge triple crisis, which the book really focuses on in 1980. First is the cocaine issue, not so much cocaine bloodshed or bullets, but cocaine money, and how the vast amounts of money spilled through the city, and they really corrupted everything, but most especially the banking system. There were 26 banks who immediately started taking really bad money. And then it also infiltrated the police department. So the homicide department, which was about to go absolutely crazy, was investigated by the FBI, and they get rid of about half the homicide detectives, so that there are only 3 homicide detectives left who have more than 1 year of experience, just when homicide is going to go from 120 dead a year to almost 600 dead a year. Then the second big issue that year was immigration. This is the year of the Mariel boat lift, when 125,000 people are dumped in small boats by Fidel Castro and brought to the Keys, and they pretty much all end up in Miami. They're processed or end up here. Hidden among those 125,000 are the entire Cuban prison system. So we had about 5,000 new criminals arriving on the streets of Miami. We already had roughly 3,000 to 4,000 felons. That's what a city our size would be expected to have. So you basically got the police who they've suddenly got double the amount of criminals that they have to deal with just from Mariel, as well as the Colombian guys who are also up to no good on the streets of Miami. And then the third crisis that year is the sort of saga of Arthur McDuffie. And McDuffie was a 33-year-old ex-Marine. He was a middle-class black insurance agent who was driving home late night on a motorcycle. He either rolls a stop sign or gives a finger to the police, depending which one you believe. This sets off a chase. He's chased by both county cops and city cops. And when he finally pulls over 8 minutes later, he is beaten into a coma by 15 policemen. They then fake the scene to make it look like a traffic accident. An investigation begins because of someone who witnesses what's happening, feels so bad about what they've seen, the savagery which they've seen the police behave, that a phone call eventually ends up being placed to this extraordinary reporter, Edna Buchanan, and she breaks this case on to the Miami Herald. This leads to the indictment of 5 of those policemen, which then leads to the trial in April and May. And this trial is moved to Tampa, and to perhaps, actually it was to a lot of people's surprise, all 5 of those police officers were acquitted. And they were acquitted on a Saturday when, guess what, no one's really at work, no one's at school, and Miami catches fire that night. And those fires aren't put out till 3 days later. The National Guard are called out. There are huge parts of the city that become totally lawless for that weekend. And those are the sort of three crises that the mayor has to deal with, that Jimmy Carter, his friend, who was good friends with the mayor, didn't want to deal with during an election year. So Miami's really left to its own devices on how it's going to reinvent itself in every way, shape, and form.
That's a lot. And what's
Sorry.
amazing, no, I'm saying, but what's amazing is the story. I mean, we all know, having lived through it and see where we are today, you know, Miami did reinvent itself. And it really somehow, and a lot of it was led through really a lot of what the cultural community, I mean, there was obviously really good political leadership, but we'll talk later about some of the big cultural events that actually put Miami on a different, well, actually resuscitated the reputation of Miami, whether it was Cristo, Miami Vice, Architectonica, and the dazzling new skyline. So the image of Miami, I think, in a way, was sort of reshaped at that time and made by other type of image makers. But Robert, you know, maybe you could tell us a little bit about you. You came to Miami, you grew up in Miami and went off to school and then came back here in the early 70s and became part of a really interesting collective of artists called the Black Arts Workshop in Coconut Grove. I mean, can you talk a little bit about what that program did and your awareness and how, you know, all this was going on? I mean, the workshop operated during this entire, did you feel all this going on around you, and how do you think the, you know, Black artists that were part of the workshop responded to this or reacted to these times?
Well, the workshop was going on during that time, and in Coconut Grove, there was remnants of the riots in Overtown that affected growth in the Grove. As far as having lasting effect of it, we decided to actually go into the community to bring the arts to the community to give if you will, a distraction to those events, because that was something that most of us had gone through in different ways, but not as extreme. So our approach was literally to actually give a distraction to that.
So, I mean, you were all a group of artists who were very community engaged and really trying to go into the schools, develop cultural programs, give visibility
Yes.
to what was going on creatively and culturally in the Black community. But do you feel that the work that was coming out of the workshop was being shaped by the times or in response to the times?
It was in response to the times, to the point that from my perspective, those issues were like the norm. You know, just having interactions with the police, that was at the norm, that you didn't want to actually bring it out of proportion, but just not deal with it, but avoid any exacerbations of that.
I mean, were the type of art making that was happening, either, I know that you said that you were personally influenced a lot by Purvis Young, who was very active in the community in the 70s and 80s, and certainly around this time. I mean, how would you describe some of the art making that was happening in terms of it? Do you feel like it gave visual evidence of? I mean, it's, when I look at some of the stuff of Purvis, it was so optimistic and so uplifting, and so it didn't. How would you explain that and the aesthetic of what was happening within the Black Arts Workshop and within the Black art community in general in Miami? Because there was a really vibrant community.
Yes,
I mean, there always has been.
The majority of the artwork that came out of the Black Arts Workshop was uplifting. Like I say, we didn't really focus too much on the riots or against the police. Those things were either said very subtle. Use a lot of subtle artwork that well, not muted what was being done, or talk more about the police situation going on at that time. Like I would say, the work was subtle in talking about the situations that were going on.
And so, I mean, Nicholas, I'm just curious, like, and because there was so much that was going on in this image in the city, like 1979, Architectonica was just starting. Cristo in 1980 was already initiating Surrounded Islands. I mean, there was this from 1979 to 1981. I mean, this was something that Maurice was also involved in. It was sort of like the predecessor event to Art Basel was called the New World. The New World Festival of the Arts. I mean, this was like a huge 6-week festival of opera and performance art. I mean, even David Hockney. I mean, it took place, I think, in 1982, but I think the planning for it started like in the early 80s with David Hockney doing the poster for that event. And then you had all this, stuff that was going on in South Beach with the historic preservation and the architecture. And then, I mean, there was a very strong literary movement here. There were a lot of writers who were living, in the Grove. There was definitely a bohemian Grove, and even the predecessor organization to Bakehouse started in the late 70s in Coconut Grove. I mean, Nicholas, did you have any sense of what, visually or culturally was going on during this time, or even Chire, or just chime in, you all, because I think, even reading your book now makes me think that there's so many things that are still that they're the same. I mean, we're in these, there's a lot of turbulence now. There's, the racial reckoning. I mean, Miami's come a long way in so many ways. I mean, you could say that the non-group still exists in the, through the Trumpsters, or the, those who support, President Trump, and the pandemic and the idea of a city dealing with, all sorts of dynamics. And yet, you feel the vibrancy of the cultural community responding to that. Chire, do you feel that obviously your work is strongly rooted in memory and healing.
Mm-hmm.
Talk a little bit about it, and also how you feel that it's connecting to what's going on in the current context.
Yeah, when I was listening to the book, I was picking out parallels between what was happening then and what's happening now. There are so many. I think the community that was most surprised by the acquittal of the officers was not the Black community, it was everybody else. There was a radio DJ who was preparing the community for, listen, this may not go the way we think, so y'all just chill and wait, you know? And even, you know, the Miami Times was preparing the community. And I think it was the shock that just hit the community and then a visceral response, right? And then I remember the law enforcement and political leaders having anxiety about what happens in the community. They were on edge, right? And that is what happened, you know, after each time the police murdered a Black man or a Black woman. Then it was the same thing that happened as a result of the leading up to the election. You know, people were on edge. People were trying to calm people. Don't react. Don't quote unquote riot, because I think they were expecting a specific group of people to respond violently. But I think that as a Black person and as a member of this community, we expect things, right? Things aren't really surprising anymore. So I think our approach now is, okay, this is going to happen, but what are we going to do to combat that later, right? And then I think another parallel is the intervening of the creatives into what's happening socially. Because I remember a couple years ago when the Creosote exhibition came to PAM, and I was having to tour that work and talk about that work with groups that came, I was immediately brought back to, this was happening in the midst of, you know, crisis on the streets, you know, the influx of drugs into Miami. And then this artist comes and creates something beautiful and engages so many members of the community. And that's what artists do. We intervene when there's crisis happening. And it's kind of what I consider the work that I do. I try to intervene and address a crisis and raise awareness, because I kind of want to give people pause. I want you to pause. And that's the role of an artist, you know, to make people pause and to make people.
Could you just describe the work you're doing right now to give context to what you're saying?
Yeah. So the work that I'm doing now is a memorial mural. It is on the back wall of the Bakehouse Art Complex facing 95, and it is called Say Their Names. I have Say Their Names printed in 3 different languages, in English, Spanish, and Haitian Creole. And then I have hand painted the names of victims of gun violence, police violence, and domestic violence. And I've been working on this with a group of people, a group of volunteers. We've been working on it for almost 6 months. We're nearly done. And this work has intervened. It has caused conversations, given people pause, because I think you have to stop and do that sometimes. And if you can get people to do that through your craft, then I think you have a responsibility to do that.
But tell everybody and Nicholas about how your work started, because this project is just one part of your work, and then maybe a little bit about where you envision your work going and what you thought you'd be doing this year, and how the pandemic has sort of caused you to pause and do something else.
Facts. So this is the evolution of a body of work that I started almost 5 years ago, where I was doing portraits of victims of gun violence, police violence, and domestic violence. I would draw their portraits, and I would research what happened to them, and that would accompany the work when I would display the work. And through this work, I formed a relationship with the community, a different type of relationship, with members of the community that aren't often heard. And so I started to exhibit the work, and then I thought, you know, since with the onset of the pandemic, you know, I was furloughed from my job, so I had time. And so I thought, how can I push this work further? And I wanted it to be more accessible. I wanted people to focus on names and make a connection through a name. And I wanted people to understand that this isn't specifically one group that suffers from this type of crime. It affects all different groups. And Miami is a melting pot. And if we can come together and try to address specific issues, why can't we do that through art? And I thought that I would be teaching all you, but I've become heavily immersed in my work, and my priorities have really shifted, and I kind of want to continue that. I'm on the ground working with other community organizations, and I want to continue that. And maybe in the future, I'll do more murals and have more dialogues. I would like to see that. And ultimately, a very large memorial mural somewhere.
Anywhere special?
In DC. Because, you know, I think it's one thing for me to put this work on display in front of people who get it, who recognize what's happening, but it also should be on display in front of people who can change laws and who can really make change as it pertains to the epidemic of gun. We are facing an epidemic within a pandemic, and people who are already touched by tragedy and grieving to suffer through a pandemic, it just compounds the emotion. And this, I didn't think that this would touch people the way that it has, but I'm really thankful that it has.
It's been extraordinary just to watch for the past 6 months, not like out there every day, but I mean, she has the whole neighborhood, the whole community, people driving down from other parts of the state to paint the names of their relatives who, you know, were affected by gun violence. I think public art, I mean, storytelling, Nicholas, I mean, writing a book is a very public art. And of course, Robert, you know, that most of the type of work that you've done over the years has been very public. The work that you did at the Haitian Cultural Center, the Bright Line. I mean, maybe each of you could talk about, you know, what obviously you feel, do you feel a responsibility? I mean, what is the responsibility of, you know, to the public? What responsibility do you feel to the public? I mean, Nicholas, did you write this story for you, or, I mean, obviously, I mean, that's a stupid question, but yeah. I mean, there's just something about being in the public realm and putting yourself into the public realm. So I think what that experience is like.
I think I probably have the same, you know, I think it's slightly related to Shire's work, that I worry about what gets forgotten. And I don't want, there's a lot I don't want people to forget, because I think it's absolute, you know, we're living in the aftermath of these experiences that other people went through, and all those decisions that were taken in the aftermath. So if you don't understand what happened, then you don't really know where you are. So I think, you know, and I think even people, I mean, my job as a writer was, I feel, is really to give voices to a lot of people whose stories are about to, you know, they're some of these people, you know, like Maurice Ferré, he died last year. You know, I'm so glad I got to spend all that time with him and to capture his point of view, because I'd hate to think that story wouldn't have been told. And I think, you know, even within the book, to get a little bit meta, I think Edna Buchanan was kind of thinking in the way that Shire thinks, that she made it her business, even though she covered 5,000 murders during her career. She decided, she swore to herself in 1980 that even though, you know, when she'd started, she was dealing with one murder every 3 days. Suddenly in 1980 and 81, she's now dealing with up to three murders a day. And she decided that although that's too much to cover, you know, it's just too much work for one person to do, but she wanted every single one of those names to be in the Miami Herald. And even, you know, it got to the point where before she would devote, you know, like whole articles to one person, suddenly she was trying to fit, you know, 3 or 4 murder victims into into one story, and some, you'd only have a paragraph. But even that was a way to hang on to a story, because for people like me, when I go back to the Herald and I'm doing my research, sometimes all it needs is I need one name and an address, and then I can go and find that story myself, and I can see what the real story is behind that. And I think that's incredibly important, because guess what? Otherwise, boom, gone forever.
And especially in a city that's so young and still seemingly transient, those stories move on and disappear. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something, I'm sorry, Robert. There was something that Edna said in the book that I thought it resonated with me. She said that when she goes out to visit families, she gets ignored, embraced, screamed at, and all these different things, right? And she understood that all of these people, all of these families were in different processes of grief. But she said, ultimately, after they go through that process, they all have the same goal, that their loved ones are remembered. And I was like, whew, there you go.
Yeah. And I would say that the editors would try to tell her, she's like, well, I've got 4 murders and I want to put them all in today's paper. And they'd be like, just pick the important one. And she'd be like, well, hang on a minute. To the families, these are all important. I'm not going to choose. And so she would hide, for instance, she would hide race, because she didn't want the editors being like, oh, that's a black on black murder, so we're not going to cover that one. So she would try and get them all in there no matter what. And I think, for this is 40 years ago. I think it was a really honest way to think about tragedy.
And it was interesting, even just reading your book a second time in preparation of this, because I didn't remember when I read it the first time, the detail of her talking about trying to get all those names, especially when the crime rate was escalating. But I mean, how many other layers in your book there are, not just about the big story of race, but the very specific stories of race or crime or violence or grief or anger or corruption.
Yeah, busy year.
Yeah. So, I mean, do you have a project that you're working on now that you can talk about?
I have a project I'm working on. The truth is, I won't talk about it until my publisher says it's a green light. I do want to stay in Miami. I mean, I'm staying in Miami anyway, physically, but I do want to continue writing about Miami. I think this is an amazingly underwritten city. The New Yorks of the world get 200 books every year about them. I think Miami still has a small voice and not an enormous amount of respect from other cities. We're still much more important for people who live outside of the United States than for people who live inside the United States. And I want to do my bit to help correct that and tell Miami stories, because we have better stories than anyone else here. We really do. We've got thousands of stories, enough for 100 writers, 100 artists. People should come down here and get digging.
And I mean, it's so interesting because Miami always, people always wrote about Miami from the outside. People always made fun of it. It was always talked about as the city of the future in one way, as if it never had a present and never even had a present identity. But then they always wrote about it as being a city of the future in terms of this is what America will look like. And what Miami is going through is what the rest of America will go through in 20 years from now, 30 years from now. So, in a way, I think having, for the many of us who've lived through this and survived through this, Robert, do you think the city, I find the city is incredibly resilient. Even though we're going through a really tough time, I feel optimistic, especially, being around so many young creative people, whether they're storytellers, the writers or the musicians or the visual artists, it just seems like there is or the not-for-profit entrepreneurs, people really trying to do good work in this community. There seems to be a lot of, for me, seems to be very optimistic.
I've always found it very optimistic, very advanced. A lot of opportunities for creating. For example, we got involved with the Shadavia Jenkins Park, created a memorial just because nothing was being said, just as Chire has done. So I find it very ripe for creation. I mean, I've been involved in a lot of things that really are different than the story that comes out about Miami as being a crime-ridden city, or the cocaine capital, things like the zoo and things that bring creative opportunities.
Yeah, Robert was originally, well, I guess it was right after you were, or while you were working with the Black Arts Workshop, you were also designing all the sets, so to speak, or the environments. The environments for the Metro, what is now the Metro Zoo, which is really one of my favorite places in Miami.
Correct. Zoo Miami.
What I think is really important, I mean, the idea of memory and, and just the idea of, writing is an act of memorializing, Chire, what you're doing, the public, like I said, the public art. I mean, I was talking to another artist not that long ago who I met in the early 70s or the mid 70s, Jean Tinney, who also was part of the Black Arts Workshop. And it was really very reassuring to see, I mean, because Miami never really, I mean, there should be something to celebrate or commemorate or to somehow make sure that we don't forget all these things, but that there are a lot of people here quietly in their own way, maybe not well known, like the whole Virginia Beach project that Jean's working on, that really is, documenting the history and what occurred there, or saving a cemetery in Key West that was, a cemetery where slaves were buried and were just discovered and people didn't know. I think people now in a city, it's like the city sort of become much more permanent. So it really cares about its history and cares about its memory, and what a better way to do it than, through writing and through public art and through storytelling. I mean, Chire, are you aware of other projects, or Nicholas or Robert, that are happening in town around that? I mean, Dej, who is the
He's building an anthology. One thing that always kind of makes me think is when people say that Miami is a young city, and then listening to Nicholas's book, I see why it's called a young city, right? Because what Maurice Ferre did here in Miami really is a mark on the timeline. And there was so much change happening even in that 1 year that it kind of gave birth to this city. It kind of transformed it into something else. And I never really knew the impact he had on Miami. And I think people who come here, I came here when I was 9, but there should be more of a dedication to informing people who come here about the history here, because even some people who live here were not really aware of what was happening in other areas of Miami, because that's mentioned in the book, like certain communities that were responding to what happened with Arthur McDuffie. They were not concerned with the Mario boat lift, because this is what Black folks was concerned about, and then understanding all the interconnectedness with all these different cultures in Miami and how the histories intersect. It really, I think we won't be so siloed, so segregated in specific areas, because there's so much history here, even though it is a young city.
Laura, do we have any, hi there, Laura, welcome back. Can you tell if does anybody have any questions?
Yes, so actually, Lonnie just submitted a question and she's asking, what is one thing that you as an artist would suggest to artists that transport here from other places?
Is that asked to everybody?
I think so. I don't know, Lonnie, if you had someone specific in mind, but Shire, Robert, would you like to start off?
Yeah, I think that an artist who coming to the city should get really informed, completely all around in different ethnic groups. The more you're informed about different areas of the city, the better you're prepared to deal with things that happen in the city.
I agree. I agree. I think that anyone who comes to a city, I think that you should spend time learning about that city and the nature of the culture of that city. And I think that one of the things that I really value about Mr. McKnight is that me growing up as an artist, he was an artist that was always mentioned as sort of like an OG of the art world. This is an artist that we respect, that you can follow behind, that you should do as he does, because he's a great example of an artist of the city. And he's often mentioned in conversations about artists in Miami. And I really, really value that. And I think that artists should do their due diligence when they come to any area.
Nicholas, tell us how you plunged in and how did you begin to navigate the culture of the city or the cultures of the city and the many Miamis that there are?
I always begin by asking myself really dumb questions that I presume everyone else has figured out, but I just don't know the answer to. So I guess my first big question moving down here was, how come everyone's speaking Spanish everywhere? Why wasn't everyone absorbed by an American city? Why did the immigrants absorb the city and not let it go? And that sort of took me, a lot of people would be like, well, if you really want to know, it really shifted around the time of Marielle. So people were always sending me back to 1980 anyway. We all knew about the Cuban immigration here in 1960, but then why weren't Cubans absorbed into America? And this was a conversation I actually had with Mayor Ferrer before he died, and I was positing that this is how it's always going to be here. Right now 63% of households speak a second language other than English. That's an incredible statistic for a city, right? You can easily live and die and everything in between in the city without ever actually grasping the English language fully. And so I was telling Maurice, well, you're obviously part of this, and this is how it's always going to be. And he was like, no. He's like, no, America is such a strong idea that America, the American idea, is stronger than every other idea. And in the end, Miami will be a very American city in its own terms, but that heavy Latin influence will eventually fade, and generation to generation, you'll get something that you recognize as much more typical. And I think that's a really strong idea, and that's something I would never have even thought about had it not been for sort of diving in and asking questions. So it all begins with, everything begins with curiosity. So come here, stay curious. You should, if you're moving to a new city, you should be curious. Take a long sniff of what's around you, because this is, yes, it's a really young city, but boy, have we packed the history in decade by decade. You can look at any decade in this city's history, and it is stuffed full of stories.
And there is a running DNA, sort of around, the real estate booms and busts, the always the dirty money or the laundered money, and the schemers, but it always bounces back. It's always, Miami has always done an extraordinary job at resuscitating its reputation. It started that, like, even after, I guess it was really at the World's Fair is when it used to present itself at the 1933 and the 1939 World's Fair. It had such a terrible reputation in the 20s of selling underwater land. That's why I'm not so, that everybody just bashed it and said, this is the most terrible thing. They were buying real estate that was underwater and just based on beautiful images and advertising. And yet, the World's Fair came along, and the Florida Pavilion was always the best, and its reputation always came back. So it is a place that's resilient and incredibly creative. But there is this sort of DNA. I mean, I don't think it's by accident that Disney World is in the state of Florida. But I mean, and I don't think it's a bad thing either. I mean, I think it's a place with a very strong and really interesting personality, every part of the state. I mean, it's complicated, but it has.
I think we always have just more dreamers than we have schemers most of the time. And I think that's, that just keeps us ticking along.
Uh-huh. I like that.
What other questions?
So we have a question for Nicholas from Adriana. If you were writing a book called Miami 2020, who would be the main characters and what would be the main story?
Wow.
That's a good one.
Yeah. Boy, who is the main character of 2020? Well, I guess coronavirus is the main character of 2020, right?
Yeah.
And so I guess the really fascinating thing for me being here during this year is being, I live on Miami Beach, but then, I drive across and I hit the city of Miami, and then a mile later I'm in the county, and I'm under 3 sets of rules and regulations. That has been sort of fascinating to remember how fractured this country can be when in a crisis, which of course reminded me of 1980, that you can have federal responses, but guess what? The county's going to say one thing, the state says another, and then, the municipalities will say third and fourth things. So, really confusing, interesting place to be. But I guess Carlos Jimenez would have an appearance or two. Daniela Levine Carver would make a great. There you go. We need a happy ending. Who else do we want to throw in there? Robert?
The scammist. He got to be in there.
It's sad that there aren't the Edna Buchanans of today. I mean, whether it's not necessarily crime, but just the type of reporting and the investigation.
Well, we had Julie Brown in the Epstein story. That's out of Miami.
Oh yeah.
So
Harold does. That was Jeffrey Epstein. Well, we don't talk about him.
One time for Julie. One time. And you know what? It's usually one person who decides, look, this shit ain't right. I have to speak up about it. And something needs to be done, because there's always, the status quo, the corruption in the police department. They back each other no matter what. But then, in Nicholas's book, he's talking about people who took a stand like, look, this is not going to go. This is not right. There's always that one person who speaks up. Yeah. And that's why I try to encourage people to do that. Even in an ocean of dissent, you have to be that one person to speak up and say, this shit ain't right.
Yeah.
You can say it just like that. Mm-hmm.
Good thing to follow. Any other?
Yeah, we just got a question from Grace. How can art build on a city in which diversity seems to separate instead become the great unifier? 2 to 3 ideas one would share with a visitor, a sort of art pitch of Miami today.
An art pitch.
Well, hold on. Let me look at this again. She said.
Yeah. Say that again, Laura.
Let me put it on so all of you can read it. The panelist.
It's a good question.
You have to agree that diversity separates people. I don't think that diverse separates people.
That's correct. Yeah.
I feel like when I'm in a diverse environment, a truly diverse environment, it opens my mind to different ideas, and we can talk about different things. When people engage with my work, they are from all different backgrounds, and it is a diverse conversation in and of itself. And I think that is what art should invoke. And I think diversity is a good thing.
And I think that, within Miami, where diversity really embraces diversity is within the cultural. It happens in the cultural sphere, and especially among individual cultural makers or artists and across disciplines. I mean, do you have that opinion, Nicholas or Robert?
Yeah, I mean, I do think I totally agree with what Chire said. And for me, the most fun thing about coming down here, and certainly the fun thing about researching this book, is that I pretty much spent a third of my time speaking to Anglos, a third of my time speaking to Black Miamians, and a third of my speaking to Latins. And that was, that was eye-opening, because you're getting all these perspectives, looking at the same events and reading them in sometimes the same way, sometimes extremely different ways. And that's sort of what makes Miami fascinating. So yes, diversity is the great strength, but I'd also agree that we do need more places like Bakehouse, which are sort of meeting grounds and forums for diversity. Diversity is really easy in places where everyone's got lots of money, no one cares. That money brings people together, and so socioeconomics do. But I think at an artistic level, and we do need the more Pams and bakehouses there are, the better for everyone, because that's where I get for people like me, and I presume that's true for Robert and Chire as well, that some of your best ideas come out of having your own ideas confronted and changed, and you try and stay open to other people's ideas.
Yes.
Yeah, one of the reasons I came to the Bakehouse years ago.
He was an artist there, right?
Yes, was because I needed just the diversity to expand my creative output. I mean, I was with the Black Arts Workshop, and at one point I started feeling stifled by the kind of work that I was doing, and I found out about the Bakehouse, and I gave that a shot to see what it would do to my creativity. So yes, diversity is good for creativity, and this, as it was asked, yes. So with diversity,
So the ideas would be more creative spaces where people of diverse backgrounds can come together. I mean, there are those spaces in town, but sadly, for the moment, I think that's part of the sad part, is we can't physically be together. But I mean, conversations and being outdoors. I mean, Chire, you have the most. Tell about what a typical day for you is out on Northwest 6th Avenue.
A typical day is, well, now that I've progressed so far on this wall, I don't know, Cathy, this wall is what, 200 feet? I don't know. But yes, at least 200 feet.
Maybe more.
As I progress, I feel like there's more and more energy there, because I feel like spaces hold energy. And more people are being drawn to this spot. And people are coming up who have seen the progression. They drive through there and they wouldn't stop, but this time they'll stop and say, "You've come so far." I have people come and bring me offerings. Somebody bought me lunch on Monday, which was great. And people are always looking to do something, to give me something, to talk about this. And another thing that's really interesting is that this is in Wynwood, and Wynwood is known as a space that area that embraces artists, but the type of art that's in Wynwood is very different. And community members have said to me that they're surprised that I got permission to put this type of work up, and then they're surprised that it doesn't look like graffiti, even though graffiti is an art form. So it's something different for people to look at. And I really appreciate the responses. And I realized today, as I was listening to Nicholas's book, that when I leave, the intersection that I take to get onto the ramp to go to 95 is where Arthur McDuffie was beaten to death, at that intersection. And I I spent a lot of time at that intersection, so I know it's a furniture store and like a restaurant or something, but it doesn't look like this type of tragedy happened there. But I'm sure if I got out and stood there, I would feel that energy in that space. So I think that the remembrance is also really important. We talked about that earlier. Like there should be something there to mark that happened there. We need to work on that.
We will. Okay, does anybody have any final thoughts or anything they want to say? Laura, any other questions that are unanswered? Lots of unanswered questions, actually, but.
No other questions. If Chire, Nicholas, or Robert have anything you'd like to end on.
Well, I'd like to just thank you all again. And Nicholas, thank you for that really wonderful gift to our city. And now that you're part of the city. So thank you for the gift to all of us, and really just having the opportunity to learn so much more. Again, if people who are listening haven't yet read it, really encourage you to get it and read it or listen to it in whatever form you desire. And Chire, thank you so much for the great work and that you contribute to Bakehouse and to the overall community. Robert, you're legendary. I mean, I've known you for 40 something years, so you're very modest and quiet, but I like Chire. I mean, you've been here doing so much work all these years, and I think that you are so respected by the overall community. And I'm so thrilled that you accepted the invitation to be with us tonight. And thank you all, listening audience who are here with us, for joining us, and have a good evening. Stay safe, wear your masks, social distance, and don't get into trouble.
Good trouble. Good trouble.
Good trouble. That's right.
Good trouble.
Yes.
Good trouble.
Good conversation.
Thank you all. Laura, thank you.
Thank you.
Good
Bye
night,
now.
everybody.
Good night.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
Bye.